Hello, welcome to the Daily Climate Show. Coming up today, developing nations take the stage at COP27, demanding compensation from richer countries and fossil fuel companies for the damage caused by climate change.
While they are profiting, the planet is burning.
The UK pledges £200 million to help Africa's green adaptation, but there are questions over how soon the continent can move away from gas. And how the result of today's midterm elections could test the United States' commitment to climate action. Hi there, good to see you on the Daily Climate Show, where we track the changes to our world and interrogate some of the potential solutions to the climate crisis. Now, one of the big themes of this year's COP27 summit is climate reparations. That's essentially compensation paid to those nations that have suffered most from climate change at the hands of those who have contributed the most emissions. Countries affected by extreme weather and slow onset events such as melting ice are asking big polluting nations to pay up. That is in addition to the $100 billion a year promised by rich nations to developing countries by 2020, a target that has been repeatedly missed. Pakistan is among those asking for help. Earlier this year, extreme flooding in Pakistan is estimated to have killed more than 1,500 people and caused $40 billion worth of damage. Small islands and low-lying coastal developing nations vulnerable to rising sea levels have been asking for help for some time. And who could forget this address from COP26 in Glasgow last year? The Foreign Minister of Tuvalu, a country of 9 small low-lying islands, warning it may soon become uninhabitable. But in the last hour, the Prime Minister of Pakistan recounted how his nation had suffered from these extreme floods.
An estimate of damage and loss has exceeded $30 billion. And this all happened despite our very low carbon footprints, and yet we became a victim of something with which we had nothing to do. And of course, it was a man-made disaster.
And a little earlier, the Prime Minister of the Caribbean nation Antigua and Barbuda echoed calls for richer countries to stump up more cash to help small nations. Gaston Brown also said fossil fuel companies should pay a global carbon tax on their profits.
It is about time that these companies are made to pay a global carbon tax on their profits as a source of funding for loss and damage. Profligate producers of fossil fuels have benefited from extortionate profits at the expense of human civilization. While they are profiting, the planet is burning. Loss and damage should not be seen through a divisive and controversial lens, but as a form of climate justice.
Well, to our climate change and energy correspondent, Hannah Thomas-Peter, who's at COP27 in Egypt. Hannah, not everyone sold on this idea of reparations or compensation, but Pakistan's leader suggesting some kind of index. How would that work?
Yes, a vulnerable nations index to help establish who is owed the money. Frankly, that's what Pakistan's Prime Minister is asking for. You know, there are lots of ideas about how this loss and damage funding might work. Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, calling as well for a global tax on fossil fuel companies. I just spoke to her, actually, and she told me in no uncertain terms that it doesn't really matter what developed rich nations think, but that this is an idea whose time has come. She compared it to the suffragettes movement. But there is a certain reality to all of this, and that is that the US in particular and other rich nations are really reluctant to do any more than just talk about loss and damage at the moment. There is certainly a real reluctance to go any further in terms of creating a new funding facility. That is not on the table at all. Rich countries much prefer to divert funds to those in need via existing infrastructure, like, for example, various UN agencies and the World Bank and the World Health Organization and so on. And therefore, at the moment, unless anything radical shifts, there's only a handful of countries, rich ones anyway, who've agreed to even countenance putting money into a separate pot for developing nations vulnerable to climate change to access.
All right, Hannah, I'll back to you in just a moment. First, though, the United Kingdom has pledged £200 million to help African nations transition to a greener future. But questions remain about just how that money is going to be spent. Let's hear from the presidents of Ghana and South Africa speaking about why their continent needs help in the fight against climate change.
Our continent will need a predictable, appropriate, and at-scale funding stream and technological support.
With her vast land, Africa has the greatest potential to help decarbonize the world. It is critical in this regard that the developed world makes good its long-delayed pledge to mobilize and make available $100 billion annually to the poorer countries to assist in the fight against climate change.
So that is the case for investment, but some governments on the African continent have expressed frustration at being told how to spend any financial support. COP27 hosts Egypt and also Algeria believe they should be allowed to use more gas, a fossil fuel, to supply power to their people. And let us look at why, at present, 600 million people lack access to electricity, most of them in sub-Saharan Africa. That is 43% of the continent's population. More than 5,000 billion cubic metres of natural gas resources have been discovered in Africa, but not yet approved for development. Renewable advocates say there should be no more investment in gas, especially in new infrastructure. Emissions from use of these gas resources over the next 30 years would be around 10 gigatons if added to Africa's total today. They would bring its share of global emission to 3.5%. Let us return to Hannah now in Egypt. So this new funding for the African nations. Some questions, though, over whether the continent is actually prioritising fossil fuels or renewables.
Well, it wants to do both. And the position of countries like Senegal, the gas-producing nation, wants to sell gas to Germany, and Algeria, big gas-producing nation, is that we have to lift our own people out of poverty. We have to give them access to electricity. 600 million people on the continent without access to electricity at the moment. They want to create growth. They want to enjoy all the benefits of consuming energy that Western nations have traditionally, and of course they did it exclusively with dirty fossil fuels and helped to drive this crisis. At the same time, of course, they want to invest in renewables, and their position is that this is about justice. Why can't we do both things?
All right, Hannah, many thanks indeed. Hannah Thomas-Peter. Now, earlier this year, the United States Congress approved a major climate bill directing $370 billion into renewable energy production and reducing greenhouse gases. It was seen as a major climate victory, with one of the world's biggest polluters taking a new direction. Well, let's bring you a quick reminder of who the world's biggest polluters are. China is the world's biggest, the rest of the top five made up by the US, India, Russia and Japan. None of these countries' leaders are in Sharm el-Sheikh today, although we do know that Joe Biden will join the summit after the US midterm election results. The question is, though, would defeat for Joe Biden's Democrats in these elections make it harder for him to deliver on that climate agenda? Well, the director of independent think tank E3G's DC office, Claire Healy, joins me now. Good to see you, Claire. So, quick prediction, what you think might happen in the midterms?
So I'm not a pollster, I have to say, and the pollsters often get it wrong, but the latest polls indicate the Republicans will take back control of the House and the Senate. There's a handful of races and it's still a toss-up that we're watching to see who controls the Senate.
What happens then to this climate bill? We know Donald Trump and plenty of Republicans opposition. Could it be stymied?
The quick answer is no. It could be slowed down, and sure, a Republican Congress could indeed sap energy. But the three big bills that this Congress has passed are now laws. and the tax incentives that they, provide to many states, blue states and red states, have been inscribed into the tax code as of January the 1st. So that can't be undone. I do think in the past, a Republican Congress has meant doom for climate policy and a bit of a whiplash for US climate diplomacy. I do think there are reasons today to be a bit more pragmatic and a bit more optimistic. And there's been a lot of progress done under the past 2 years of the Biden administration. And that progress, it can't stop and it won't stop. And I think regardless of the outcome of the midterms, we can still make progress in the next 2 years.
Do you think there could be some kind of consensus with Republicans, any kind of compromise?
So, I don't want to come across as Pollyanna-ish. For sure, I think many of the Republicans perhaps will be obstructionist, and for sure they'll have a robust oversight. But I think there are at least 3 sets of reasons why Republicans will be a bit more pragmatic. And that's number one, on the economy side, I think Republicans have warmed up to more of an industrial policy, and they can see building the clean energy economy makes the US more competitive with China. Number two, on the politics side, the way the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, has been written into law, many of those powerful tax incentives go to red states. Indeed, much of the infrastructure is being built in Republican strongholds and rural areas, so it's quite popular. And number three, from an electoral point of view, while we're talking today about the midterms, and for sure Kevin McCarthy wants to become Speaker of the House, but they know, I think, for their longer term electoral success, climate and environment have to be a core part of their platform because, one, the American public want it. They're feeling the impacts, just like you're reporting from Sharm el-Sheikh. The reality is such that the impacts are being felt. Americans want more climate action, not less.
All right, I'll have to stop you there.
Economy.
I'll have to stop you there, Claire, because we're out of time. But thank you very much indeed for joining us, Claire Healy.
Thank you.
Now, don't forget you can get all the latest news from COP27 on our live blog. Just scan the QR code on screen right now. And just before we go, a reminder that our weekly climate show with Tom Heap is back. That is on Saturdays and Sundays at 3:30 in the afternoon or at 7:30 in the evening. But that is it for today. So thank you for your company. Join us tomorrow for the very latest from COP27 and the rest of the news affecting the planet. From all the team, bye-bye.